So, welcome to the Node API meeting on 24th of October. I'm going to share my screen. Um, can you see my screen? It should be the Node API team project.
Yep.
Yes.
Cool. And let's start with the down list. Is there anything that people would like to bring up first? I think it's worth mentioning that I already invited a Kran, if
Yeah.
I pronounce it correctly.
Yes.
Yeah, welcome to the team. And
Thank you.
yeah,
I think I will be focusing for the time being very much focused on the conformance suite and not maybe picking up like general tickets across the board, if that makes sense.
that'll be
That's
cool.
why. Yeah.
Thank you for taking up the initiative.
Great. Thank you.
Um,
Yeah. Speaking of
but
that, maybe
yeah,
maybe am I assigned to that ticket, the CTS ticket that I created? I don't think I'm assigned to it.
um, I'm going to open in the new tab. I think the issue is here. This one, right?
Yep.
Okay,
Great.
thank you for working on it. Um, About the repository, I think there's no concerns raised in this admin issue. But if it will be great if we can have explicit spots from um any of you to comment on this progress or show your support through this emoji. So I will revive the repository um later today so that we can start work on it, given that there is no concern raised in this admin issue. And after that, we'll be able to, um, yep, after that, I think there's no block for us to get started on this work.
Yeah, I
But
did
anyway,
since last time, since I presented it 2 weeks ago, I did update this description of the issue based on the conversation we had, or at least my recollection of the conversation we had. Stuff around leaning a little more away from TypeScript and leaning more into ECMAScript, and then having this duality between having files, single files you can run, and then also having maybe a bundled mode where we had pre-builds available for the implementers. So it would uh, cater for both the needs that were expressed last time.
cool. Thank you. Any questions regarding the proposal here? Um, Cool. Let's jump back to the project board. Um, Anything people would like to bring up in the in progress or has pull request lists? Oh,
Um, that last one, header sync fails.
yep,
I created this issue, which has a PR. Um, it was not handling this nested if correctly.
right.
Um, but with this, I merged this merge request in my local fork, which then created a correct, the action ran correctly, and created the basically we need to check that if we were already ignoring the content because of a definition, we need to continue to ignore it once a new if-def came.
Yeah,
And if you go back to the conversation tab, I linked in that second sentence, this PR was merged and created the header sync PR 102, and then that would end up being the changes. There's a blank line there because in the original header file, there's basically a blank line and then an if block and then a blank line. So removing the if block, the two blank lines come together.
So I have a question. I don't understand that. Why do we need to filter out all these extra definitions?
In many moons past, the team decided that the experimental APIs should be removed from the Node API headers. And the action sync, there's a script in this repository that basically does that. It removes all of the APIs and all of the C++ code that are included within a if experimental block.
The question I
Um,
asked before, it was, for example, my scenario to implement this Node API for Hermes, right? And technically today I have to somehow to maintain my own copy of all these header files, which I'm taking from node.js project, node project. I can't take these official headers because if I want to have some kind of experimental APIs, I can't do it. I can't implement them in my Hermes implementation. And to me, it's like looks like totally backwards.
I think the original motivation of this package, of this npm package, which called Node API headers, were that the add-on authors will be able to install these headers without depending on Node, um, the Node version that you are currently using with, to build the add-on. This is particularly useful for add-ons that they are compiling like for different runtimes. Like if they are compiling the add-on for Dino or Hermes, for example, they will not be able to use the experimental features because um, I think it's a similar condition when we introduced a new experimental features in the latest version of Node. These APIs might not be available in the previous Node versions yet. For example, if we landed a we added a I'm taking this um I'm taking this API as an example. So if we add a Node API create object with properties and it landed in the latest Node.js version v25, it may not be available in the v22 yet, but if people are using with Node API headers, they are not like using the Node API headers from the Node.js installation. They will have this Node API create object with properties defined if they define the Node API experimental, but in reality, if they are using their build add-on with Node.js version v22, these symbols are not available. So for the criteria for a API version to exit experimental status is that the API needs to be available generally in all Node.js versions, which is the one that made this API headers package useful for all add-ons because they don't have to care about which Node.js version they they are compiling with. So that's kind of the idea that we originally removed the API experimental from this package because the add-ons are the audiences of this package, not embedders. I would assume that the embedders should include a copy of the Node API headers into their source code because um, the version of the API headers that the embedders are compiling with are essentially need an effort to implement every API that are presented in the API headers. So, for example, if the embedders try tries to synchronize the Node API headers to their repository, and there's a new API being added in the synchronized version of API headers. I would assume that, for example, Hermes will have to implement the new API rather than, I mean, ignoring the new API, and which will cause a missing symbol in the and final product, right? So
Mhm.
it's not I would assume that it's not a similar use case for add-ons and the um API not API implementers because add-ons can ignore the new APIs being added, but implementers cannot. They have to implement every API that that are introduced in the new headers. So I think that's a original um, original rationale between on this package.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks.
Mhm. Yeah, so that merge request is ready whenever. And then we can just move forward when that's merged.
Okay, cool. Thank you for working on this. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, please take a look at the podcast, and I think it's very nice to have a example request available because, yeah, I think you don't have to run it locally, and we'll be able to see what's the effect of the change. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Anything else people would like to bring up first?
I would like to also talk about the has PR for add float 16 array support
Yeah,
because from one of the previous merge requests where we added support for shared array buffers, which I'll talk to about in a little bit. This one made me start thinking, okay, how would we implement this in Node add-on API once this merge request gets accepted? And if we could go to the merge request for this, yes. We basically had a big discussion about the conformity of the adding enums and what our policy and procedures should be regarding that, right?
yeah,
Now, thinking of how to implement this in Node add-on API,
yeah,
we would not know if this symbol exists without there being uh, like a node API has macro definition. So what we had decided was sort of to remove the guards and remove the feature opt, I believe. And I don't think like Node add-on API would not know if the symbol exists in order to, I posted a link in the chat to a section in an API inline. Like I think yes, we can introduce it without a version guard, but I think we still need to have a macro definition saying that the symbol exists. Because if you open the link that I sent in the chat, for example, here
right?
we have a bunch, it's a case statement with all of the different uh, Node API types there.
Yeah.
Without having a macro definition to say that Node API float 16 array is defined, we would not be able to use the symbol there.
It well, I think one thing to clarify here is that when you say symbol, do you mean this enum value name or this
Yes.
right? So to be clarified, I think this is just a built-in constant value. So um we can actually just define it as a constant just inside this file. Um, but let me revisit the previous sentence about adding a new enum type value.
Okay.
Um, so if an enum type is only written from a Node API function as a out parameter, for example, for an API status, I think we don't, it is not required to be introduced with a version guard because we
Mhm.
didn't introduce any version guard for API status. And
Right.
the add-on should handle unknown values.
Hmm.
Um, for enum type using an in parameter, and it's undefined behavior unless otherwise documented, and the version new value is added with a version guard. Um, but we didn't say anything about adding a macro an API. Like for example,
Right.
Node API has something. I think if we are going to introduce it with a version guard, which makes sense for us to also add an API has um, definition. But I think the ambiguity here is that, well, probably not a ambiguity because we already added this macro definition for the experimental APIs.
Hmm.
So that's probably okay. So um, for header libraries like Node add-on API, I think the issue here is that the Node add-on API can be compiled with older um, Node versions, which may not have the API float 16 array enum value being defined.
Hmm.
Um, to make it um, be able to be compiled with any node version, I think we can just hard code the enum value to be a constant here because it it'll be we will not um we will not change the enum value for a certain enum element, right? Because that'll be API breaking.
Hmm.
So it's like every time we introduce a enum value here, it it will be a constant value across. Um, it will be a constant value and will not be changed or removed. So I think it's safe to hard code the value in Node add-on API if we want to compare it with arbitrary Node.js versions.
I see. I see.
Doesn't
Hmm.
sound good, right? Like,
Yeah, for some, I'm not particularly, I'm not particularly too fond of that
I
approach.
think
Like I would,
the original idea that we brought up in a discussion about the enum value was that can we take some strategies um, similar to the uh, like the Linux API, like we can do something like if there's a constant value, if or say if not def, and we can define this constant value as here. So
Mhm.
this in this way we can say that um, we can always put this paragraph about our about the node add-on API header file. So the all the code size will be similar because they can just take this macro um, constant definition. But
Right. Okay.
the drawback of our current enum value is that we cannot do some compiler um, macro as this does, and we cannot say that if the enum value is not defined and define it. So, but anyway, I think we can still do like if not defined and node API has load 16 array, we can um
Right. So we would, at the very least, need to have that symbol, that macro definition of node API has float 16. That needs to be included in the merge request, in the pull request that the author is working on. Is that correct?
doing this
Yes.
line.
Yes. So we're gonna keep that, but remove the experimental guards.
Um, yes, because this enum type is being used
Right.
in the auto parameter in the
Right.
API get type array info. So from the guideline, the API experimental guard should be removed, but we can still keep
Hmm.
this and node API has float 16 array. Do we need the experimental prefix?
Right. That would be the next point. I don't think we need the experimental. So since it's not under a guard, it should just be has float 16 array. And then if that symbol is defined, or rather that macro definition is defined, then I think we can correctly implement it in Node add-on API.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think we
Okay.
can say node API has float 16 array, and yeah, that's it.
Okay.
And we will not need this runtime version check.
Right.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's it.
Okay, perfect. That is good then. I just wanted to clarify. Do we have anywhere documented that we need to add the Node API has X
I think we
macro
do.
definition?
It's in the um adding a new node API. So
Must have feature. Okay.
yeah,
Okay,
so it
perfect.
said a node API experimental has but if the right.
Okay. Yep. Just wanted to verify. Thanks for that.
But thankfully, then we out of experimental phase. Do we need this flag after that?
Can you repeat the question?
My question, like, so I think like what we're trying to decide, if we want to have this macro, should this macro be named like a Node API has feature or versus Node API experimental has feature? My question about like as float 16, if we go out of this experimental phase, uh, do we need this macro after that?
I think for the float 16 arrays case, we will not say it's an experimental, because we are going to remove this experimental code as the node API value. For example, the float API float 16 array will be returned from the API get type array info regardless of the um, Node API version that you are building with, because the float array is already there for the for, for Node.js 24. So it's the JavaScript value is there regardless of the Node API version that your add-on is being compiled with.
So we need some time, some baking time, effectively, while this float 16 in Node API get propagated to all the versions of Node.js, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say, if we can actually follow the same pattern, like we can say everything what we require for this float 16 PR, we'll have just this simple define, like Node API experimental has float 16 array. So in this case, while we still this new enum type not propagated to previous versions, we can use this experimental flag. But then as soon as it becomes like part of all latest Node.js versions, we can simply remove the macro and use it everywhere.
Are you suggesting that renaming this to a Node API has float 16 array?
No, I'm not suggesting renaming that. I suggest to keep it experimental and removing this define experimental after we propagated all previous versions.
Um,
So technically, this way we kind of follow this kind of the documentation.
This to clarify, this is not a new experimental API, so it's just adding a enum value essentially. And for backporting, the previous version, in particular the Node.js v22 and v23, does not support float 16 array, and because the VA version are a little bit outdated, and we are not going to backport the VA to previous versions. So even if they have the latest Node API version, like for example Node API 11, they will not have float 16 array support.
I see.
So that's why we were saying we don't want to mark this as an API experimental, because it's it's being used in out parameter, and it can already as taking a float 16 array as a parameter in the MPI get type array info, and there's no reason for us to return a MPI valid argument for float 16 array. And so that's why I think it might be we are going to just preserve this define and this value and removing the API experimental guard. Does
Right.
that answer the question?
No, like sorry, like so I think like what we're trying to decide right now, like should we have some kind of macro? So in this C++ wrappers, we kind of compile and use this new enum, right? What you're saying that so effectively there are different levels, right? Like one of them you said first of all, does engine support it? We have some other macros for such cases. Like I believe then we talk about these external buffers. We have different type of macro which we can check, right?
Mhm.
Um,
So if you look on the code that we just simply say like certain runtimes, we say that in certain runtimes we say like okay, external buffers not supported because of this caging, V8 caging, and yeah, yes, this one, yeah, no external buffers allowed. Yeah, so technically we do have so non-experimental special matrices which helps people to compile something there like this. So the question will be about
Yes.
this float 16. Should we do this style then?
That is what we are suggesting, because we would have a macro definition that says Node API has float 16 array. And then if it's defined, then in any of, for example, Node add-on API, we can check if it's defined, then we can use that symbol.
Yeah, but I guess like my question, like what exactly this macro will mean? Like is it going to be just simply say that this header file has this enum entry, or it actually means that this specific runtime supports float 16 or not?
I think one thing to clarify here is that either or not this new enum value is being defined does not suggest that the runtime will have the support, because
Correct.
even for Node.js v24, the support for float 16 array can be turned off by flag because it's a experimental ECMAScript feature. Or on Node v22, it can be turned on because it's just that it's off by default in Node.js 22. So we cannot know the exact if it's exactly being supported in a certain runtime at build time of a add-on.
That makes sense.
Okay, so we can't say that if it's a runtime feature or not. We effectively will have a defined flag which only talks about presence of this enum inside of
Yes,
header, right?
yes.
So
Mhm.
then the next question, like, should we use experimental word inside of this macro or not? Because technically you said this feature is still experimental in ECMAScript. So what if tomorrow they decide not to go with it?
The feature is already stage 4 in ECMAScript. And when I say it was in experimental in Node.js v22, because when v22 was being released, the feature was still stage 3 in ECMAScript. So at that time, it was not enabled by default, but it was enabled by default in Node.js v24. And still the question is, in Node.js v24, the feature can be turned off by V8 flag. So what I was saying is that the feature at this time will always be available in the future ECMAScript versions. So it's not experimental in the sense of our current time, at our current time. So for Node API, what I'm saying is that there's no reason to keep it as experimental, because the enum value, once we add it, there's no chance for us to remove it or change
Okay.
it to
Okay.
another meaning.
But do we want to kind of maintain this macro forever? Like, does it mean like every time we add new enum entry, we want to add a corresponding marker?
I think it has no side effect at runtime, right? It's just a build time macro. Like if we originally started with enum value as a macro definition, just like the POSIX values, like they usually define their constant value as a macro definition. I think there's no harm at runtime, and we will have hundreds of definitions of constant value, which sounds fine. I mean, there's no cost, there's no runtime cost.
Yeah, I'm not talking about runtime cost. Like I'm talking about, so we want to have our header files to be kind of maintainable and stuff like, and we also discussing right now that how we do like for future enums. So do we want to have for any kind of new enum we add in future to add corresponding marker? Like say Node API has whatever.
I would say yes, because
I would also say yes.
the maintenance cost is quite manageable because it's just a simple definition.
Mhm.
Says it has this um, value being defined.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. And so technically, the next question will be, where do we want to define this marker? Like, do we want to put it like it's right now here, like right on top of enum value, or we really want to put some like on top of header file?
I think grouping them together might be the most easy way to manage them in the long term.
Why this question may be important? We should think about like not only about C++ code, but imagine that there are some automated tools which parsing through our header files to do some kind of bindings to other languages. So I don't know like how friendly such definition in the middle of enum would be looked by different tools.
Um,
Personally, I like it here, and um, these other tools that create language translations, whatever, should be able to support what we have here. To me, it makes more sense to put it next to the symbol because that's where the symbol is being defined.
Okay, makes sense.
yeah,
So we can start with it because like yeah, like you said, it's most natural at this point. But I think we should be ready in case if any kind of implementer who kind of works on the binding to other languages finds that they kind of tool for whatever reason chokes on it, we should be open to a suggestion to move it
Right.
some.
And like, if the tool chokes, then maybe they need to update the tool. Like, I just updated the tool that strips the experimental headers out when, so I think it's okay.
Well,
And if you refresh this, I left a comment to say remove the experimental tag.
sometimes you don't have control. Like imagine somebody programs in Go language, right? And actually it's a Go language team who does this ingestion tool for C or like I don't know
Right.
Java language, whatever like Rust language. I don't know. It's any kind of language doesn't which wants to work like closely like Zig. I don't know. It's just and so
I would
development by
wonder
don't not
how would they work with the POSIX APIs because there are a bunch of definitions of constant values in POSIX APIs
okay.
and POSIX headers. I think it's kind of the similar condition they will have to handle.
Okay, makes sense. So kind of final decision will be we'll have this defined. We'll say that Node API has float 16 array. We should remove experimental from the name.
Yeah,
And this,
Hmm.
so think like this way, if you when we do with C++ DOM APIs, we can benefit from it and we can.
yeah.
Yes.
I just want us to speak out for stuff, and since it's kind of relatively new, I think we also maybe worth to add to some to our kind of documentation about enums, because current
Um,
our doc does not say anything about these macros, and it's probably worth augmenting.
are you suggesting some additional sentences to this paragraph?
Right, like because technically we can say that it will be for to benefit C++ add-on kind of API. We also would like to have this special macro that Node API kind of has this.
Yeah, sure. That would make
We can put it
that
as
would
an
be
optional, but at least it should be documented. So technically, huge future developers will not have this WTF effect.
yeah, sure. I think that would be helpful.
Sounds good. Good discussion.
Cool.
Mm.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. And I think you also mentioned, Kevin also mentioned about the shared array buffer, right? Are there anything that we should
Yes.
discuss
It's
about?
not regarding it's not regarding the Node API implementation, but the
Yeah,
Node add-on API wrapper. Um, and basic, oh, I didn't have the page ready. Let me see. If you look at the data view, Node add-on API data view, because basically what I'm wondering is when we implement this shared array buffer in Node add-on API,
yeah,
does it need it? It cannot extend an array buffer because there are methods that shared array buffer do not have, such as detach.
yeah,
So a shared array buffer cannot be detached. But a data view has a method that is called array buffer.
yeah,
And that returns the underlying um, an API value that the data view was constructed off of. But we can construct a data view off of a shared array buffer. So there's a mismatch here, and I'm not exactly sure the best way to implement that. Because if you create a data view off of a shared array buffer, and then you call on this data view the array buffer method, you're going to get back a node add-on API array buffer object whose underlying value is not an array buffer. It's instead a shared array buffer. And maybe it might make, let's see, line 1441. That is where we get the backing array buffer, which
yeah.
basically just constructs an array buffer off of the underlying value that's being held. So if you did something like construct a data view off of a shared array buffer and then call array buffer to get the array buffer and then call detach because detach is on our node add-on API array buffer class, you will get an error because the underlying C function expects an array buffer.
Um,
So I'm not exactly sure the best way to implement that. Should there be some, because in
yeah.
yeah,
I,
because in the actual ECMAScript definition of a data view, it has a property called buffer. And
right.
then buffer returns the underlying buffer, whether it's an array buffer or a shared array buffer.
I,
So
yeah, I think the best approach might be adding a new, maybe I can just So maybe the best way to do this, so my idea might could be parent. We can add a new function called buffer to align with what's been defined in JavaScript API, which is data view the prototype the buffer. So it can return a variant of buffer or shadow buffer. And in this API, we can check, so we can update the document, say, this API this array buffer method is only available if the underlying buffer is actually a buffer, not a shared
An
array
array
buffer.
buffer.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that we can encourage people to use this new method instead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can get down with that.
Cool. Thank you.
Uh, would it make sense to use a variant or just return an API value?
Um,
And then
yeah,
the
thinking about that, I'm wondering that if it would be more flexible to return a API value instead, because I can see that in the future there might be chance that a new type of array buffer being introduced, especially there is
Mhm.
a proposal called um row rebuff, yeah, immutable array buffers. So it's already pretty close to be implemented. It's in stage 2.7, and we might be able to add a new type. It's called immutable array buffer here, which is kind of a like read-only array buffer, and uh, that will also
Mm.
affect our type annotation here, because the array buffer here is by default mutable. I'm not sure if we can codify the immutable array buffer with the existing array buffer type.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, we might
Okay.
want to return a const pointer in its data method rather than a void pointer, because for a immutable array buffer type, we want to avoid mutations at all.
Right. Okay. I like the value approach, and then it would need to just be up to the caller to cast the value to either a array buffer or shared array buffer, depending on the type. All
Yeah,
right, I'll play around with that and see what I come up with.
cool.
And then
Thank you.
that's all that I have. Sorry for taking up the whole meeting with my two things, but
Yeah, no
um,
worries. I think it's a
yeah.
really helpful discussion. Thank you for thinking about how can we support float 16 array in the Node add-on API.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, it mainly came because I had reviewed Miguel's create object with properties thing, and then that's when I saw that we needed to add that macro definition there, and then I just went down the rabbit hole with those other things.
Yeah,
Yeah, good one.
Mhm.
right. I think
Also,
this.
oh,
Yeah, please
sorry.
go ahead.
Yeah, do we already know more types that we want to implement besides the float 16 that make sense to like create tasks to do that?
Um, I don't think there are any new types being added in recent versions.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Thanks for working on this progress. I think it's pretty close to be merged once the CI is green. And please take a look at the progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think this progress is also looking good. I think it was one minor comment to incorporate the node.js test patterns.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have time to. What I'd like to do, based on this previous discussion. So currently, if you look at the test, we have three JavaScript files. Because we have main JavaScript files plus two JavaScript files which are imported from V8 test. What I would like to do, I would like to merge them all into this test instance of one single JavaScript file instead.
Yeah, I think it's a very good change. Thank you very much for working with it. No worries. I think, yep. I think the only change is that to replace to update the V8 test file with Node.js specific
Oh,
patterns.
so do you think like it's worth merging into one file instead of keeping three files?
No, what I'm saying is that to update this, to remove this assert helper
Okay.
functions and just use Node.js asserts, which will be more straightforward.
So basically, a suggestion to keep three files.
Yeah,
Okay. Just it looks a little bit excessive, but yeah, in this case, at least people will be able to sync back and see what exactly V8 is doing. Okay,
yeah.
cool. Thanks. It will be much easier.
Yeah, thank
Yes,
you for
simple
working
fix.
on it.
Yes, I'll just didn't have time to look at it.
There's one thing that I would bring up first before we closing out. It's a change in the node.h header file, and the reason about that is this line unconditionally defines API experimental. So it will after the warnings being added in the um on the API experimental that we introduced. I think it was somehow related to the Node API headers change here. So it was about this warning that we added in the JS native API header file. So if anyone include the node.h header file, they will have this API experimental defined unconditionally. So they will suffer from this. They'll be suffering from these warnings, and if they turn on the warnings as errors, this will become a errors unconditionally. So the idea is that we should remove this unconditional definition of node API experimental and define it in our source code, which is the .cc files, so that this will not impact the embedders because the node.h is only used by embedders and the add-on that are not using Node APIs. So it has no side effects in Node API add-ons, but it has side effect in embedders and Node embedders and C++ add-ons. So that's kind of the change here. So I think the issue here is that are we going to consider this as a breaking change and mark it as a sample major? I would say that we already asked add-on authors to define an API experimental, if they would like to use the experimental APIs. So, and this does not impact the Node API add-ons because they should not include the node.h. So the only impact here is that the embedders of Node.js and the C++ add-ons, which they don't use Node APIs at all. So I would say that this should be more like a bug fix rather than a break and change. So please um, comment on the progress if you have any ideas or agree with the path forward. And yeah, that's a progress that I would like to bring up.
Yeah, I wonder if Anna, if she's right, in terms of we should remove maybe the whole include node API from.
The include node API.h is required because there's a add linked binding function here, which depends on the API add-on register function.
Oh, I see.
We can duplicate it, but I don't think it's worth it. So that's the reason that I didn't remove it.
Okay, makes sense.
Cool.
Then we pretty much can remove this. Okay. Why it could be major? It's not. Does it affect people? If we.
Usually we will mark the change that may introduce breaking change as a sample major, but that depends on how we consider a patch and if it's breaking change. So, because to be honest, every bug fix may introduce a behavior change, right? So that's subjective. Um, that would be subjective to our maintainers to see if a change is a broken change, and that's why I'm saying that I would say this is more a bug fix rather than a breaking change.
Could
So
there
we
be a
don't mark it as a single major.
could there be a case that embedders, which are including node.h, are also using node APIs that are experimental, but they didn't know that they were experimental?
Like I said, the add-ons using experimental node APIs are expected to define API experimentals because that's how we document it.
Mhm.
And
I
yeah,
do remember in the past, I can't remember what the situation was, but we broke existing module compilation for something.
I think it was the pure GC pure finalizer, and it was
Yes,
an experimental features. And the reason behind that is some
yes,
add-ons unconditionally define the API experimental. So it's a different case
that
here
isn't, yeah, you're
because
absolutely right.
here people are if if we are being break by this change, if we are being broken by this change, they do not have the API experimental being defined.
When they should.
Yeah,
Okay. Whereas the other people, they were failing because they had it defined when they did not necessarily
they
when
do
they
not
shouldn't have.
use
Yeah.
experimental
Okay.
features. Yeah,
Uh-huh. Perfect, perfect. Okay. That sounds good to me. I'll put my thoughts and comments on this as well.
yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I think we
Mhm.
are up to time, and I will see you on GitHub and have a good weekend.
All
You
right.
too.
Ciao,
Yeah.
Bye
ciao.
bye.
Bye.
See
Bye.
ya.